For the next meeting, we're good to pay our.
Oh, are we recording now? Yeah. Okay, cool. I'll offline with you about that. I'm hot mic'd right now. Thank you all for coming. My name is Tom. I'm with Protect PT. My title is Environmental Policy Advocate. Just to be super clear, none of the folks who are presenting tonight are actually from MAWC. We work for nonprofits that are concerned with clean air and water. And when we found, we did one of these events recently in another community, and we found that people were very, very interested in the subject matter. And we thought, well, we should do a couple more and do them in other communities so that you folks have a chance to come, because the last one wasn't in your backyard. And MAWC serves quite a large area. And I'm going to pass the mic down so other folks can introduce themselves as well.
Hello, everyone. My name is James Cato. I am a regional organizer with Mountain Watershed Association, and our nonprofit focuses on the restoration and conservation of the Youghiogheny River watershed, as well as all of its tributaries. But really nice to be here tonight. Good to see you all. Pass it down to Koa.
Hi, I'm Koa Wrights with Rivers Waterkeeper, and we are an environmental nonprofit organization based in water, doing a lot of similar work to Mountain Watershed, where we protect our waterways, their three rivers, and their tributaries.
Hi, everyone. I'm Hannah Homan. I am also with Rivers Waterkeeper. I am one of their programs coordinators. I also am a 2013 Kiski graduate, so I'm super happy to be back home to talk to some people that are local. So thank you all for showing up.
Cool. So today we're going to talk about MAWC, which is the Municipal Authority of Westmoreland County. That's where most of you folks get your water. And we're going to talk about the impact of the recent drought last year and the way that companies can contribute or avoid contributing to that issue. We're going to start off with the impact of droughts. We're going to go from there and talk about water sales, and then we're going to talk about water conservation orders, which many of you are probably familiar with what that means at this point. And then we're going to cover how to reach out to MAWC and what they can do differently in the future to avoid situations like we had recently. Next slide, please. This will be, after we're done presenting, we will have a back and forth discussion. So you folks can ask questions or make your own comments. And, you know, if you disagree with somebody else who's in the room, we just ask you be courteous, debate ideas, not people. Make sure everybody gets a chance to speak. And just, yeah, be neighborly. Next slide, please. All right. And this is you, right? Go up.
All right, so I'm going to give a little bit of background on watersheds and droughts in general. I think a lot of this information many of you know, but it's good to just go over it so we're all on the same page. So what is a watershed? A watershed is an area of land that channels all the rainfall and snowmelt into creeks, streams, rivers, and eventually to things called outflow points. So this would be the ocean, bays, and then reservoirs, which is what we're talking about today. And so a weather drought is a drought caused by there's not enough precipitation over an extended period of time. And this is usually over a season or more. And that results in a water shortage that can cause adverse impacts to humans, as we've seen, including as well as vegetation and animals. And so it's important to note that there's weather droughts, and then there's also droughts that can be caused by increases of water being drawn out. When there's too much water drawn out of a reservoir, this can also cause a drought. And so how droughts impact reservoirs: when there's not enough precipitation in a watershed, or there's too much water being pulled out to fill different collection points like the Beaver Run Reservoir, the levels in that area can deplete to extremely low levels and cause many issues like we've been seeing and what we're discussing. And so these are just a couple of maps to kind of give general idea of the overview of the area we're talking about. So as you can see, the left one is Beaver Run Reservoir. You can see it's pretty expansive. It's 1,300 acres, and it lies within a 43 square mile drainage area. And it serves over 100,000 people, approximately 130,000. And on the right, we have the MAWC service area. And so you can see on this map that this is kind of just showing the different areas that they serve. And then you can see labeled in red are the water treatment plants that treat the water from the Beaver Run Reservoir. And I think this is just a good setup for what we're talking about today. And I'll pass it to Hannah to talk about a few more details.
So we wanted to give a quick background on the Beaver Run watershed drought, which was announced in November in 2023. And more recently, it was lifted on March 12th, 2024. But one of the things we wanted to make sure we knew about was a lot of people have said, you know, there's water. We've seen a lot of rain in this area, but there is a deep need for precipitation upstream of the reservoir for 7-feeder streams. And their data that they used to determine whether they were in a drought and why this order was put in was because they were looking at all of the areas around it coming into it. And so it was done preventatively, but we also want to discuss the depletion of water supplies. So when we're looking at what is happening here, it's a two-part thing. We see we have a drought, a weather drought, and we also seeing water depletion. And so when they predict, whenever we're looking at why a water supply is declining, there's challenges in that. There's the increasing occurrence and severity of drought that we're seeing. There's also land cover and land use changes that we see, so less permeable surfaces, things like that, and also increased water demand, which is also what we're really talking about. So when we're seeing that water systems that are experiencing withdrawals without recharge, that's an even greater risk for water supplies. And so we're going to discuss this later in our presentation, but when oil and gas companies pull water, it does not return back to the system. And so we're seeing that not only is that a problem that we're facing in the immediate, we're also seeing that as fracking increases, they're using more water per year. And we'll be able to pull these slides up after so you guys can get closer looks. These were a little small, so I understand if you're not getting all the information. But you can see the trend here that I'm going to sit down so I can read it a little better. From 2008 to 2019, they went from using 2 to 7 million gallons of water per well to 14 to 39 million gallons of water per well in 2018, meaning that there has been a increased rate of 1 million gallons of water per well per year. And I know those were a ton of words that totally, but when you look at this, we'll be able to pull this up later, but we just wanted to give you the two different things: weather drought, water depletion, and we're seeing a combination of things. We're not just pointing one finger. There's many to point.
All right, so one of the things that Hannah mentioned is that water that gets used by fracking companies doesn't re-enter the watershed in a usable condition. That's something that I want you to bear in mind as we go over these numbers. And if anybody wants to dive into these numbers after, I'm happy to give folks my card. There are 2 different reservoirs that are in this system that are relevant to this number, this 328 million gallons. That is how many gallons were taken out of this watershed and used for fracking. There were 3 companies that were responsible for withdrawing that water. By far the most was Olympus. There are a few different theories I've heard as to why Olympus is so much more, ranging from they just have more wells in the area to they may be using fundamentally different practices, or their wells may be of a different depth. How much water is used per well is dependent on how deep the well goes and how long the laterals are. And those numbers are getting larger, which is one of the reasons the chart that Hannah just showed you is climbing. As time goes on, the easily accessible gas has been fracked. They're going deeper and they're going further. So to put it into perspective, because I know that I don't have an easy time picturing 100 million gallons and putting it into context, the math that I did indicates that this is equivalent to the amount of water annually consumed by every house put together in Vandergrift. And remember, the houses, that waste, the once they use the water, it can be rehabilitated. It can be put back into the watershed. Water that is used for fracking cannot. So it's sort of like the difference between renting and owning. It's something that's recyclable versus something that is essentially single use, becomes trash. Next slide, please. So this is another thing, and we are still kind of wrapping our heads around this. So these articles came out just over the last 24 hours or so. So CNX, which was one of the companies that was on the last slide, they were issued a violation just recently for taking water that they were not allowed to take. During the conservation order that recently happened, MAWC they voluntarily paused fracking withdrawals, and it appears that not everybody obeyed that. So if anybody is curious, they can read more about that on PennEnvironmentDigest.com. That is a website run by a former DEP secretary. The whole story again is on penenvironmentdigest.com. Next slide, please. This has resulted in a rather large fine being issued to CNX. This is another article that just came out. Again, we are still kind of digesting the implications of it. If you're curious, it is on the Trib. So if you look up Trib CNX resources, look for an article from the last couple of days, you will find more information about this violation. You want to include those links? Awesome. Thank you, Brendan. Yeah, so Brendan will send a follow-up email to everybody that signed up. And if you want those links, they will be in the email. Thank you. Next slide. This is a slide that our environmental scientist, Yvonne Sorvaku, put together also to contextualize the amount of water that we are talking about here. So each of the places with a faucet icon, and it's the same picture on all the screens. I'm just looking at the one in the back. Each of those is a place where there is a permit for a fracking company to withdraw water. The numbers are the daily gallons they are allowed to withdraw in those places. It is a staggering amount of water. They rarely do withdraw that much all at once, but the numbers are really, really, really huge. So they could take hundreds of millions of gallons of water a day. Yeah, you have a question, sir? I don't actually recall. Do you remember? Oh, different companies. Okay. Apex, I think, is the other one. Yeah.
This is information. Did a service function request to show
Thank you. Next slide, please. And this is you, right?
So yeah, so I'm just going to briefly cover the concept of the drought contingency plan, when that becomes important, and how it might affect you. So in essence, MAWC is required to have a drought contingency plan with the Commonwealth, with Pennsylvania. Each county is monitored separately by the Department of Environmental Protection, where a specific county could be classified as normal under a drought watch, drought warning, or drought emergency. To analyze whether a particular county falls under any of these classifications, the DEP will look at a range of factors. These include things like stream flow, groundwater, precipitation, as well as soil moisture measurements. It also considers information from the public water suppliers, which may be sounding the alarm if water levels are depleted or if they have abundant resources. So this figure that you can kind of see on the right-hand side of this slide is an example of one of DEP's measurements. This is the surface water flow in Westmoreland County. Specifically, this is from the Loyal Hanna. So it's a little hard to see, but there's a black line that rises and falls. And late last year and early this year, the levels did dip into that kind of yellow band on that figure, which implies that there was a drought watch for this factor in Westmoreland just recently. Next slide, please. And this is another slide that's kind of a more blown up figure. You can actually see this time that gives you an idea of what the DEP monitors and how these different measurements kind of combine into one classification. So you can see here that, this is actually from the DEP's website, which anyone can check out and look at the more up-to-date. This one was actually from a couple months ago. But as you can see, this is back when Westmoreland was in drought watch. A lot of the counties in Pennsylvania looked normal, but there were some areas as well of Pennsylvania that were in a drought warning, so it had more dire situation with their water. So again, all these charts are on the DEP's website. and they do show up-to-date information. So if you're ever curious about the state of our water systems and what the DEP is finding, I would definitely recommend checking it out. And you can then click on any of the counties and get more in-depth information about any of those measurements that the DEP is taking for your county. In this case, you could check on Allegheny County and do a little bit more in-depth research. Next slide, please. So I mentioned the drought contingency plan that water suppliers are required to have and maintain with the Commonwealth, that basically outlines what they will do at different stages of drought, and how to kind of mitigate drought should it occur. At the Beaver Run Reservoir specifically, when the level in the reservoir reaches 1,034 feet above sea level, that's a trigger point for MAWC to reach out and implement voluntary conservation measures, which again, that did come into effect very recently. And that's supposed to try to slow down the water usage, the depletion rate of the reservoir. If this isn't enough, or if there's still very little precipitation and the drought continues and the reservoir falls another foot down to 1,033 feet above sea level, then this will cause them to institute mandatory conservation measures, which again, we did dip into that at one point. So earlier this year and late last year, there was a drought, which is traditionally, historically uncommon for our region, which, as you all know, is a pretty water-rich region. This got down to the point where MAWC instituted mandatory conservation measures for a little while, although at the end of January, like Hannah mentioned, the water level was raised enough to get back to the voluntary conservation measure. And recently, luckily, we received a good amount of rain, and now we've escaped the conservation measures for a while. Just super recently, March 12th was when that happened. But next slide. Do I have another slide? Yes. No, that's the last one. But yeah, so all of this is to say that as we've experienced drought recently, there's a lot of people who are looking more carefully about how we're using our water in Allegheny County, in Westmoreland County. We've begun to scrutinize where this water is going, not only in our personal lives, in our houses, in our homes, but also with how we conduct business in our counties, especially as we seem to be having some aberrant droughts in Pennsylvania.
Section. All right, so what happens now, right? We're coming out of this drought. What's next? We are looking toward next time. There will never be a period in history where there isn't going to be another drought, right? There's always going to be another drought. How do we prepare ourselves better for this? How do we end up in a situation where, so last year, one of the things that upset me a little bit about the way things happened was that the drought watch was declared in Westmoreland County in July, and the the pause on fracking withdrawals didn't happen until November. And I felt, and Protect PT felt, and many of the people sitting up here felt that those things should have happened at the same time. If people were being asked to curtail watering their vegetable gardens, shouldn't companies have been asked to cut back as well? So on to that point, we have 4 suggestions for MAWC, and I also want to give credit where credit is due. MAWC came to the first meeting that we had on this subject, and we have been meeting with them, and they have been listening. So we do believe that there are good people over there, and they are going to try to do the right thing. We also believe it doesn't hurt to put a little pressure on them. So there is a petition here, and if you agree with these goals, please come find us after. It's over there. Just come up here and sign it. It calls for 4 measures to be taken. Oh, great. So you can sign it on your way out, or cool. Yeah, we can pass them around after I'm done going over what it is. But yeah, that's great. Thank you. So the first one is relating to conservation. As I said, last year there was a drought watch declared in Westmoreland County. in July, and then in November, that was when the fracking withdrawals were paused. There is a way that MAWC can revise their internal policies so that those happen at the same time. So that anytime the Department of Environmental Protection declares that our region is in drought watch or drought warning or anything severe like that, they automatically pause fracking withdrawals. They can, I don't need to go into the specifics, but they have a way that they can trigger that automatically. Secondly, we would like to see them place a cap on how many gallons can be withdrawn from the reservoir on an annual basis. We have set that number at about half of what they withdrew last year. That is a suggestion from us. Don't know exactly where they would set the number if they did that. I do think MAWC sees their job as selling water, and I don't know how they feel about not making money. But in that case, we believe it is the right thing to do. We also want to see them create a long-term strategic plan for water conservation. They have some strategic plans. Water conservation isn't one of them. We'd like to see it become one of them. And lastly, we want to see them charging fair rates for the water that is consumed by fracking. Remember earlier, Hannah pointed out that the water that gets used by frackers cannot re-enter the watershed in a usable condition. Your family will never be able to drink that water. Therefore, we believe that should cost a different amount of money per gallon. Now, this is actually, when we included this initially, I kind of thought it was a long shot, but through our discussions with MAWC, actually, not only is this legally possible, it seems like they kind of like the idea. So we might actually win on this one, I think. My fingers are crossed. We'll certainly keep folks posted. But they negotiate these contracts on an annual basis. So there would be an opportunity with the next contracts. Now, if these 4 items are something that you agree with, again, Brendan has a petition back there. We have petitions up here, and you can also reach out to MAWC directly. If you can go to the last slide here. Yeah, so this is the next meeting of MAWC, April 17th at noon at 124 Park and Pool Road, New Stanton, PA 15672. I know that most folks are working at noon. I'm sorry they didn't consult me when they scheduled it. There's also, so MAWC is what's called a project of Westmoreland County, which means that the county commissioners have power over it to some extent. They can define its mission. And if they passed an ordinance that says we revise the way we're defining their mission as being primarily serving residential customers and commercial customers and industrial customers that return water in a usable condition to the watershed, with any use that doesn't return it being secondary. So if you want to go to a Westmoreland County Commissioner meeting, the next one is April 11th at 10 a.m. in the Commissioner's Public Meeting Room, Courthouse Square, Greensburg, PA 15601. And as a reminder, you don't have to memorize this stuff. This will be in the email that Brendan sends out. Last slide is just thank you. We're going to start the discussion now. And also, just to make it very easy, that on the far right of the screen is a QR code. If you hold your phone up and use the camera, it will take you to a digital version of the petition. It's all the same petition. If you sign it there or if you sign it online, it is the same. We get it either way. But the digital one, you can email to your friends and family. So do you folks have any closing thoughts, or should we open it up for a discussion? Cool. All right. Go ahead. Yeah, that people always ask us that, and that is a major issue because nowhere wants to get that waste, right? You've been to an HRG, I think, one of our workshops, so you know what's in that stuff. We're talking about not just the chemicals that they put into it when they're doing the fracking, which is proppants and PFAS and forever chemicals, but also whatever was underground that comes back up with it, which can include what they call naturally occurring radioactive materials, or TENORMs. That stuff all comes up and they have to do something with it. Right now, there are no real good solutions for that. They're kind of all problematic. So one of the things that municipalities will buy it for about $100, where it would normally cost them like $200 or $300 per unit of measure. I don't remember what it is, gallon or something, for spreading it on their roads as a dust suppressant. And to get a chemical that wasn't produced in this way, that isn't someone else's waste stream, is more expensive. So municipalities will buy it and then put it on their roads, and then that stuff ends up in the air. There are some regulations to limit this, but there are loopholes in them. Yeah, you have a question about that? Mhm. We hear that a lot. Yeah. Mhm. 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 I think that was the rate that they pay per gallon right now, which is I think so. So then that's it is a little bit so that it's the same rate that a residence would pay for treated water, and they're getting untreated water. So they aren't getting the water any cheaper than you do, which actually was pleasant news to me. I thought they were getting a bulk discount until we started chatting with MAWC. The fine, I believe, was a different number, but I don't remember it off the top of my head. We can go back to that slide in a little bit, but I didn't finish answering your other question yet. Some other things that can happen with the wastewater, it can go to landfills. Generally speaking, landfills in this part of Pennsylvania are not properly equipped to handle this stuff. They are meant for more, prosaic, they're meant for your household wastes. There are a few landfills further out west that are properly equipped, and it costs about twice as much if they want to dump their garbage there. So generally speaking, they don't. There was an incident where they dumped some of this waste in a landfill here. I think it was at Westmoreland Sanitary Landfill where the bacteria all died. Yeah. Bell Vernon Water Authority. Yeah. Yeah. So, mhm.
Yeah, so there is I mentioned before the meeting started, but right along Swickley Creek there is a facility called Max Environmental, which is the only RCRA Class C hazardous waste landfill in the state, and that does accept some of the nastier stuff out of this industry's waste stream. Um, and that facility, unfortunately, though it is able to legally take some of the obviously most hazardous waste. Um, it's had a lot of problems over the years. It's an older facility, but they've had a very long history of compliance issues, which is, of course, especially disturbing to hear from a hazardous waste landfill. And they are, I believe, a couple of years ago, they're found to be the #1 airborne lead emitter in the state of Pennsylvania. So, one of many issues, but they are also able to take some of that waste.
And then the last the other solution to the problem that they've found is to make what's called an injection well. Yep. Yeah. So that's been a hot news item recently. And we actually have some good news about that today. Did this pop out? Is it still working? Is this still working, the microphone? Okay. All right. But yeah, so an injection well, typically the way they do this, they'll take an old well that has been abandoned, that isn't being used anymore, and they will repurpose it to inject the waste underground. Now, these wells, they were built in an earlier era. Their casings are not designed for the high pressures of the waste that they're injecting underground. You'll see leaks sometimes, and they'll communicate with other wells. So if there are abandoned wells near them, that can be bad. If there are production wells that are active near an injection well, it can contaminate the production well. So one of the things that we have seen, James and I were talking about this earlier today, is that sometimes conventional well operators will oppose injection wells going in near their wells because it means that their wells will be contaminated and they will no longer make a profit. So, for example, in Fayette County, there was a proposed injection well, and there was a major outcry about it from the residents. And we did an analysis that indicated that there was an abandoned well that hadn't been included on the map by the application. That well appeared to perforate an abandoned coal mine. That coal mine ran under the Monongahela, about 80 feet below the course of the river. So we couldn't prove that it would contaminate the Monongahela, but even the possibility was deeply disturbing. That's upriver of 25 million people's drinking water. And we don't know exactly why that application was withdrawn, but it was withdrawn after we objected, Mountain Watershed Association objected, the locals, their county commissioners, their state representative objected, and it was kind of a miracle that we got that application pulled. And then, do you want to share the big news from today?
I mean, it's all of us. It's all of us. But yeah, so regarding that injection well up in Fayette County, in Nicholson Township specifically, one final thing I wanted to point out about that just before I get into the news is that this area is predominantly not an area that opposes fracking. So I just want to make it clear that like the waste stream is in many ways like people are realizing that the waste stream is a big problem. And you know, some of the reasons that they cited outside of the contamination concerns is that it's not good for their neighborhood. It's not good for their township. If you're just injecting waste into the earth, how is that elevating the community? What does that bring to the community? So the news though today, actually, earlier today, Tom was there, I was there. In Fayette County, the commissioners voted to adopt zoning amendments that would severely limit injection wells in Fayette County as a whole, which is very exciting. And it would force when, you know, a potential operator comes in and wants to build a new injection well in Fayette County, there would have to be a 2,500-foot setback from structures, which would add a lot of protections for the community. And there were a whole host of other hoops to jump through, essentially, so that the community would be more protected, because not only was this a bad place for the environment, but it was also basically right across the street from people's homes. So there was a human side to it as well as an environmental concern. And today, the Fayette County Commissioners took a big step to ensure that people in Fayette County are protected from this kind of issue. And I will also note that there was a lot of talk about an outright ban in Fayette County. But after a lot of discussion, I don't want to speak for any of the commissioners or anything like that, but my understanding is that the concern with that approach was that it would not hold up from any scrutiny, because they don't have kind of the legal jurisdiction to make that kind of unilateral ban and make it essentially illegal in Fayette County, but they can add protections to make sure that people who are living there don't end up really close to these kinds of developments.
Yeah, so the on one of the examples, like there was a woman right across the street from this thing who had a drinking well, like that her family got their water from, and that wasn't on the map of this applicant. Under the current protections enacted today by the Fayette County Commissioners, that cannot happen. And I get choked up about this. This is one of the best things that I've seen happen in my time doing this work. And if you are concerned about that kind of thing in your backyard, you can come up to me afterward. I can give you my card. We can talk about it. Your local municipality can pass something similar if it hasn't already. So that was a very long answer to your question, but it's a really important part of it. Like, this stuff doesn't happen in a vacuum, right? The industry, you know, we want to look at this water from beginning to end. And we want to think about, like, how should we be using our water? How should we be looking at our watershed? You know, should we like, sometimes MAWC thinks about water that goes over the spillway as wasted because they didn't get a chance to sell it, but we don't. Yeah, right. But we don't see it that way, because that water re-enters the watershed. If they sell it to frackers, it's gone. That's the way that we see it. Other questions, other thoughts?